Hey, what's up guys? In this video, let's take a look at the best installation locations for a custom installed remote mount radar detector that you're going to install somewhere in the grille area of your car. Depending on where you install it can actually make a big difference to your range and performance of the detector. Imagine spending thousands of dollars on a high-end long-range radar detector plus the cost of installation, and then installing it in a way where you just completely kneecap the performance of your radar detector. It's kind of a waste, you know, and so the location actually really matters. It's kind of similar to the idea with a windshield mount radar detector. You know, you can install it on your windshield and that's great, really easy to do and whatnot. For aesthetic reasons, you may not want it installed there, or maybe you don't want it visible to potential thieves or law enforcement, but there's functional reasons too. If you have a heated windshield or if you have any sort of metallic windshield, that can actually block the radar signal and prevent your windshield mount radar detector from operating properly. Similarly, if you have any sort of remote detector where you install it, it can be a big issue. You can install it maybe out in the open with nothing blocking the radar signal. Maybe you want it a little visually less visible. You can install it maybe behind a grille of your vehicle, or maybe you want it completely hidden in stealth and install it behind a bumper or a body panel of your vehicle. Where you choose to install it, again, can make a big difference to performance, and the results here are a little bit counterintuitive, so let's go ahead and talk about that. Now, it makes sense that the ideal place to install it is in a way where you have nothing in front of the radar detector's horn itself, right? With nothing blocking the radar signal from arriving to the radar detector, you're going to get the highest level of performance, and that totally makes sense, right? And that's why if you take a look at the front of my car, whenever you look at any sort of remote mount radar detectors, they're all installed out in the open, so for testing purposes, I can compare all of them and make sure that I'm not doing anything to compromise the performance of the radar detector. It's also much easier to install this way, to just, you know, stick it in the grill, but, you know, for a more permanent install, you may want something that looks a little bit better, or maybe install it behind something, or again, maybe in your car. You've got a different car than me, that may not be an option, so let's take a look at some of the other options. Now, the second most common thing that I see that's actually probably one of the worst things that you can do is to install your radar detector behind the grille of your vehicle. Whether you have like vertical grille slats, or maybe even worse, is going to be one of those honeycomb mesh grills. The last test that I looked at, they compared a radar detector out in the open versus behind a mesh grill. The grill actually cut down the range of the radar detector and basically cut it in half. It really significantly reduced the range of the radar detector, and this may sound kind of weird, you know, the radar detector can see through the grill for the most part, but why is it being affected to this extent? It has to do with the principle known as destructive interference. 9C1 actually did a really good post about this on the forums a couple years ago, and I'll link you to it, but the general idea is, ideally you're going to want a radar signal to arrive to the radar detector completely unobstructed and unobscured. What happens is, if you have a grill in front of the radar detector, some of the signal passes through unobstructed, some of it is going to hit the grill and get delayed a little bit, and so you wind up actually having a phase shift where some arrives a little bit faster and some travels through space a little bit slower. What happens is, when the signal has a phase shift like this, some of the signal actually starts to interfere with the rest of the signal, and they conflict, and they actually start to cancel one another out. And so because they're kind of canceling each other out, the signal strength is actually going to be reduced, and so you're going to have a weaker signal that's arriving here, and thus you're going to have less range and worse performance with your radar detector. And so this is actually a big deal, this whole propagation of the radar signal. I mean, it actually has to do with why you'll see different types of lenses here. The condenser lens on the front of the detector, you'll notice depending on the detector, you know, some of them may be completely flat. Some of them, and this is really common, will be kind of rounded like this. Some of them will be kind of angled. You'll notice this difference in the condenser lens is something that radar detector engineers are specifically accounting for. And that just has to do with when the radar signal is arriving to the horn, it gets kind of distorted, and depending on the type of distortion that you get, this actually compensates for the distortion to kind of it's kind of the inverse of what's happening with the horn. So this kind of stuff, it's a big deal. So installing it behind a grill, bad idea, really common, and it's kind of counterintuitive. Now, the other option that you could take a look at is maybe having the detector completely visually hidden and installing it behind a body panel or a bumper of your car. It turns out this is actually a better option typically than installing it behind a grill in the vehicle. Now, what you're going to look for is, if you want to go for a completely visually hidden install, you're going to want to install it in a location where you have a plastic, not a metallic panel there. You want to make sure that the body panels of your car are flat. They're not angular or curved in any way, because that kind of starts to unevenly distort the signal again, kind of like the mesh grille. So you're going to want a flat body panel, plastic body panel, and you're going to want non-metallic paint. Metal, whether it's a piece of metal or metallic paint, again, is going to be blocking to a certain extent the radar signal and reducing the range of your radar detector. And so these are the things you're going to want to look out for. And again, this is going to vary from car to car because they're all made of different materials and they're designed a little bit differently. And the exact location where you install the radar detector, you may not ultimately know until you wind up pulling the bumper off of your car and you take a look at, number one, what's kind of behind the bumper, and number two, what are the optimal locations where you can physically mount the detector's antenna itself. And so, these are the things to look out for once you're actually doing the install, so that you can be aware of and you can talk to your installer when they're doing the install. Ultimately, there's going to wind up being compromises between visually what you want, functionally what's available in your car, and then, how much of a compromise, if any, you're willing to make to the performance of your radar detector. And so, again, if you want a stealth install, flat, plastic, non-metallic paint is what you want to look for. Ideally, you're going to want nothing in front of the radar detector, and the worst thing that you can do is install it behind a grill, whether it's like vertical grill slats or any sort of honeycomb mesh. So awesome, there you go. Those are kind of the typical things to look for any sort of custom installed remote mount radar detector. If you're looking for a comparison for the best custom installed detectors, I actually did a video about that. You can click this button up here if you'd like to watch that video. Otherwise, yeah, hope this has been helpful. Thanks so much for watching. Let me know what additional questions you guys have, and I may cover them in an upcoming episode of 5 Minute Fridays. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.